This is a talk which covers a little bit of everything, really. We talk a bit about Studio Bark, which is an architecture practice which we set up about 10 years ago. And then it kind of goes into quite in detail about the U-Build construction system, which you kind of see some modules of there. It's like big Lego. And then talk a little bit about the book that was mentioned, Protest Architecture, and why we wrote that. So how we got from architecture to modular construction system to activism. So that's the kind of journey of the talk, and I'll try and keep it sort of more or less on time. So first of all, this is us. This is Studio Bark and U-Build. I don't think you can tell who's who from the mixture, but yeah, that was us earlier this year. And there's about I can't remember how many in this photo, but there's roughly a third U-Build and 2/3 Studio Bark. We're all based in Bethnal Green in East London, and we work on different projects. So although we're kind of all part of the same kind of holdings company, U-Build does its own stuff, Studio Bark does its own stuff, and I'll talk a bit more about that. So some Studio Bark stuff is something called Paragraph 84. The beautifully named Paragraph 84. It's previously been called Paragraph 80 and Paragraph 79. You get how the planning system works, but basically it's exceptional houses in the countryside. You can get permission for a rural house that you wouldn't be able to otherwise if it's built to the highest standards. And this is Black Barn, so it's an off-grid house, and one of the kind of sort of first in Suffolk coastal to be off-grid, but also designed to respect the kind of the local vernacular. So this is a kind of sort of typical example of one of the sort of houses that we build as a studio, and this is, I guess, our kind of bread and butter, if you like, even though it's a kind of really nice type of project to work on, because in order to prove to a local planning authority that you're meeting the criteria, you need to go to a design review panel. So you need to do a lot of work. Typically, the clients who can afford that are quite wealthy, and therefore there's a lot of architecture in there. And so it's a nice thing to be doing in addition to kind of small projects. So pays some of the bills. Other end of the scale, this is the Cork studio, and this was actually built in my back garden at the time. It's a fully biodegradable structure made out of solid cork bricks, and this was a kind of a prototype structure built to see whether you can do that. There was another kind of much bigger house which got a RIBA sort of Sterling prize using a similar principle, but when we both started, neither of us knew the other was doing it. But Studio Bark cares a lot about the environment, as probably a lot of people do, but when we set up the studio 10 years ago, not so many people did, and so our experiments with materials, trying to think about something rather than just being green, or like using 10% less kind of plastic in a material, we're like, can't we just make a biodegradable building? So those are the kind of things that we play with. This is called Making a Stand. It was in Leeds city centre for the Capital Culture, I think. And you can tell I'm not working in the Studio Bark side of the business. But this is all about sort of timber sourcing, traceability. So all of the pieces of timber which you see here are actually destined for another project. They're going to be beams in a kind of restored warehouse in Stroud. And so rather than just building an exhibition that there's then going to go down and go in the skip, because let's face it, that's what happens to a lot of exhibitions, this was designing a building or a structure with a kind of a second use in mind. So rather than it being recyclable, it's like, here's where it's going to be recycled. So that was all about kind of material passporting and how you can kind of track the use of timber. And another thing that was really important to us when we started Studio Bark is that we were actually going to be physically involved in the structures that we created. So we also set up Studio Bark Projects, which is a construction company, And although as an architect, you obviously have to go through 7 years training and get sort of ARB qualified, we realised that to set up a construction, I can't even say it, to set up a construction firm, all we needed was a white transit van and some tools. So it was pretty much that, and some insurance. So we got contractors all risks insurance. A number of us had already worked in construction sites, so we were familiar with timber. And the university that some of us met at, the University of East London, you have a construction week where you go and build something. So we wanted to kind of continue that spirit, working with universities, so creating like live summer schools where people come and learn how to build, and then we actually get to build out a number of our projects each year. So one of the projects that we built in a construction week, this is called Holloway Lightbox, and we actually used a technique for these sort of concrete tiles. So Assemble, who obviously don't need any introduction, came up with the idea of how to make this on their Sugar House studios, and they let us borrow this for this the process for here. So it was a kind of a small studio for a screenwriter and a photographer, and we built this over a couple of weeks with some university students. But this was all built like stick built, as people would say in the trade. It's like made with pieces of timber that you might buy from a builder's yard, sheets of plywood that you also would buy from a builder's yard, all cut by hand. It takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of skill, and we wondered about whether there might be another way of doing it. And so we basically came up with a system whereby instead of getting those sheets of plywood and cutting them manually, we used a CNC machine, which I'm sure some of you will be familiar with. It's basically a computer-controlled cutter which cuts the pieces out again and again in a kind of very regular way. So we'd seen that this kind of thing was happening. There was a WikiHouse was around at the time, so the idea of kind of mass distributed manufacturing. But we felt like we could do something different by making a very sort of simple block, the human-sized block, which everyone has played with wooden blocks as a child of some form, I'm sure, and we were just scaling that up. So the idea is that the blocks can be filled with insulation, and if you can build one, you can build a whole house. So just to kind of clarify how all of that fits together, so we have Studio Bark, the architecture practice, Studio Bark projects, which we set up with the transit van. And then we decided that we wanted to set UBuild up as its own entity, which I run. But I'll go a little bit into that in a bit. But the main focus of this rest of the talk is on UBuild. So the idea behind UBuild is a self-build modular construction system for the circular economy. And by that, what we were really focused on at the time was construction waste. We saw so many projects where you get huge skips at the end, you get single-use materials, plaster, concrete, metal, all going in the skip, and we wanted to change that. So we were inspired by self-builders. So this is Walter Seagull, who many of you will be familiar with. This is a project in Lewisham where he used sort of standard pieces of timber and encouraged people to self-build. We really liked that approach, but this was of its time. The buildings were very shaky, and they didn't have much insulation in. For those who love them fondly, would tell you that. So we wanted to take the spirit of this, using materials that were available, but updating it for the 21st century. So here you see the standard 8x4, foot by 4 foot sheets of plywood that you can still get, 1220 by 2440 in metric. And although that's a really annoying kind of measurement, actually for us that's really helpful because we wanted to create metric size boards. So if you see on the left hand side, we've got panels which are, for example, 600 by 1200. So you can fit 2 of them on a sheet with room for a cutter to go around the edge. So the imperial metric weird UK overlap actually worked for us really well. So we can get really high material efficiency on these boards, and we can produce them again and again and again. So here's the kind of, the UBuild in a nutshell. You get the flat panels that you've just seen cut on a CNC machine. You then assemble them to form those boxes. Once the boxes have been assembled and screwed together, they're then bolted. And the bolting process can happen again and again, so you can take them apart, reassemble them. We put insulation in. We usually use sheep wool or wood fibre, and then you can clad it with any sort of material like the concrete tiles, although we wouldn't do that again because it took far too long. Or generally timber, which is, obviously sustainable. So you can kind of see the process again here. This is with it in the kind of CNC components. So we produce panels like this or drawings like this for all of our projects as well. So you can kind of see step by step what needs to happen, which pieces need to go together. And what this means is that it goes from being a construction site to an assembly site. And if you can follow an IKEA sort of catalogue or installation manual, which not everyone can, then you've got a good start at building a U-Build building. So from that, you can kind of see that we create these sort of interactive components sort of on our website, so you can change, you can configure the size of your pods, and basically from that you should be able to rebuild your building again and again. So you could start off with some components that would make a small shed. Whether you would actually do this, no one has yet, but whether you could say, oh, I've built my shed, but now I want to upgrade it into a full house. What we have had, however, is people come back. So yesterday I was at a project where like this, we had a single-story extension, or a single-story building, and they built an extension on top of it. So we came back to the same project 7 years later, took the parts down, and then built it up again. So that's quite fun. So obviously circular economy is now a buzzword. When we started this was more about just reducing waste, but it's the same thing. So rather than designing, we're not really designing anymore, we're just configuring a system that already exists. So that reduces a lot of upfront time. Then we assemble, disassemble, and reconfigure, and it goes round and round. So once the parts are there, they're there forever. So the way that we would, in a typical architectural construction system, you might have a lot of design stage complexity and construction stage complexity. So when you've finished your work as a designer, you then give it to the contractor, and then they've still got quite a lot of figuring out to do to be like, okay, yeah, that's great, but how are we actually going to build that? Whereas what we've done is we've done a lot of extra work, and some of that has, is now kind of baked into the system. We then do more kind of schedules, working out, giving all of the pieces such that on site, the builders really don't have to do very much. And that means that the kind of the bar is lower and it's more inclusive. So we can have people on site who've never picked up a drill or a mallet before, and frequently we do sort of act like facilitators rather than lead contractors. So how do we do all of this? This is probably again familiar to some of you. We have Rhino as the kind of our main software with Grasshopper running off the back of it. And for anyone who's not used Grasshopper, it's basically like a visual programming language. So we have some very simple inputs that go into it, and then outputs which come out of it. And it looks like this when it's all coded together. This is actually coded by Tom Bennett, one of the sort of studio barkers. And so imagine that on the left-hand side, what we're putting into the software is, here's the internal walls of this building. So imagine if we kind of drew this shape of the building that we're in into the software, it would then sort of calculate, okay, how do I turn that into boxes and schedules and parts and numbers of screws, and then all of that can get sent to the machine for cutting. So this is like the output that you might get. This is the house that I was talking about, which had its extension on. And in fact, you can just about see here, that's where the flat roof was, and it now comes up like this, as of 7 o'clock yesterday evening. So we also do more bespoke stuff. This is kind of a fun one, an extension to a Georgian house. And basically, we start off with a process like this. This is a kind of, a very basic kind of Rhino render of it. And then this is what it looks like. So, this is actually an actual photograph of it. So we can kind of plan something out, even though the render's not great. I'm sure you can do better renders than this. But we can get something which is pretty accurate. although we didn't put the cushions and stuff in, so like, terrible interior designer. Anyway, so yeah, here's a range of kind of things that the U-Build system has been used for. So starting on kind of the smallest scale, garden rooms maybe isn't going to be like the most exciting thing, but actually this proved to be really important for us. We set U-Build up as its own thing in December 2019, and then obviously a couple of months later, what happened? COVID pandemic, and everyone wanted garden rooms. So this actually formed like a really good kind of, benchmark, or sorry, baseline of kind of work for us to produce these systems. And it was about the right level of kind of project for someone to do in their own time. You could do this, couple of you, in isolation in COVID in your own garden. So it was quite a good way for us to test the system before we sort of tried to do much else with it. We also worked with Guardian properties. So again, this is something that's kind of in the past 10 years has been more of a thing. Empty buildings with people staying in them for an unknown period of time. It might not be like cost effective or environmentally effective for people to build plasterboard walls in for bedrooms. But if you can have these little pods in a bigger space that can be warmed, and then people can use that and have kind of larger communal areas. So that was quite a fun project with Low Guardians. We've also worked with a number of different cabin manufacturers. Again, this was a sort of very post-COVID-y thing, kind of going out in nature. This is for Unplugged. They offer digital detoxes, so people go and lock their phone away in a box for 3 days, which is certainly something that I needed to do. And we make the cabins for them. These are actually on wheels, so again, it's a bit like the tiny house movement. We have built some tiny houses as well. Love all of that. The idea of just making things smaller, reducing your footprint, the footprint of your building means that you can reduce the footprint of your life, because the building kind of square meterage is a multiplier for everything, for cost, for carbon, and you name it, heating. Here's a little look of the inside, and I guess one of the nice things is because U-Build is structural, but also it can be used for anything. It can be made as seating, worktops, furniture, you name it. Obviously, again, this is a kind of a very sort of simple palette of materials, but for a cabin, maybe that's all right. Other kind of materials are available other than Weser spruce ply, which is what we use for our stuff. We also do some fun things like this. This is for a company called Boundless Theatre. They're really cool people. You should check them out. They have a great ethos where they have a kind of a job sharing. So all of the kind of more senior sort of theatre directors partner there or share their job with a sort of 18 to 25-year-old, and they wanted to build some pop-up spaces to tour around the UK. So they set us a brief to make these what they called a boundless box, which you can put up in a day with people who've had no experience in building before. So that was a kind of a fun prototype to do with them. We end up doing a lot of prototypes because people will come on our website, see what we do and say, can you do this? And then we do this. So a lot of the past 5 years has not been really knowing what we were going to do next. And it's quite nice to be reactive in that way. Here's also, some structures, some sculptures. This was on the roof of our building in Bethnal Green. A photographer came to us and said, hey, I'm doing portraits of all of the businesses in the street. Do you want to do something? And so we said yes. And then kind of a few weeks later, we were up on the roof and he had these sort of pink smoke canisters. It was a really hot day as well, so everyone got sunburned. This is a really interesting project. This is where I was today. This is Sustainable Ventures in County Hall. So it's sort of very sort of central London, just by the London Eye. And this is, we were asked to come up with a system of modular walls that could be installed in this listed building But the interesting brief was that when Sustainable Ventures, who are their background, they're kind of a green tech startup investor, sort of they call themselves Europe's largest green tech investment hub. And they knew that they were going to be moving onto the 3rd floor of this building. But then in 2 years, they were going to be moving up to the 5th floor. So again, you're getting the kind of the pattern here that they wanted to take their walls with them. So we came up with a system of doing that, and that was back in 2021. And lo and behold, 2 years later, they came back to us and said, you know what, actually, can we move those walls? And so we did. So everything went up in the lift, and it was a much bigger floor plate. So we brought in additional materials. And the reason I was there today is because the members who are in there, they're always changing around. So someone said, can you move our meeting room to our new bigger space that we've just taken up? So I've been to that building and I've moved it and changed the walls around and swapped panels out many times. And I have a very strange role as being partly the director of a building, of a company, but also like the lead carpenter. So so I had to do a quick change before I came here. Yeah, you've already seen this one, but this was just say that we do extensions. So you can kind of see the building there on the back of this Georgian house, this Georgian cottage. And actually, of all of the things you build, we use it for, I would say that extensions, it's like a bit touch and go as to whether we should really do it, because as you can imagine, fitting very carefully CNC cut modular components in with an old building means you have to do a lot of preparatory work, building it out, making it flat. And yeah, I think compared to this, where you can just fly along, this is sort of a lot of angles. And then this, we do whole houses. So this is called Box House, and you could probably guess why. And it was on Grand Designs. So this was for a young couple. This is where I was yesterday, putting the extension on, the one that you saw, and that's kind of in the model form. And that's what it looks like with all of the cladding. So you can't quite see the extension out the back. But yeah, it was part of a street it was called Grand Designs the Street. And it was part of 10 houses, sort of young families all building their own sort of individual houses. So a little bit more about the adaptability and how that works. You've seen sort of some of the projects, but this is the very first U-Build structure that was created, very humble. In fact, the first picture I showed you of U-Build with the students all kind of standing around was actually building this, so it was looking from the other entrance. And so this was it was quite near to the University of East London, and it was another construction week. And the students designed this pattern using kind of the kind of sort of optical illusion cladding, which I've never seen anyone do since, but quite fun. So it was for a community centre nearby. After we built it, we found out that they hadn't actually got permission for us to build it there. So there may be a bad kind of professional sort of critique on our part, but we had been assured that it could be built there. And so very unfortunately it had to be taken down again, but it was the right building for that to happen. So everything got taken down, moved through that little gate that you can see there, and then loaded onto a lorry and rebuilt in Bicester, which is the Grand Designs house, Box House that I just showed you. So it became the site office, and a number of us actually lived in there for an extended period of time. The thing on the right hand side, the sort of silver tank, is that we were using that for a shower. Yeah, that was Second Life. It then moved to Hackney, to Grow Bar, where it became an artist in residence. And there were actually some permanent steps here, so like that wasn't the kind of that wasn't the official sort of entry. It then became the site office for our Nest House project, which I'm going to show you in a little bit. And I'm not going to say finally, but as of a couple of weeks ago, it's in a garden of one of the Studio Barker's sisters in the Chilterns. So it's nice that it's had a few lives. and it will probably outlive me. So this is another one. Again, there's been a Grand Designs themes. This was Grand Designs Live. So they wanted us to build something which was kind of linked to the show at Grand Designs Live at the Excel Centre. And we said, that's cool, we want to build something, but we don't want to make something that's, you know, going to be just sort of thrown away. So we sort of, I guess, partnered this installation with another project that we had going on, which was to build a workshop in Hackney Wick. And so we said, can we just borrow the parts from that project and temporarily build it here? So then when the show had finished, we stacked everything into a lorry, took it over to the Hackney Wick site, which obviously took a little bit of coordinating, but it worked. And then we created this workspace. But what was nice is that after the workspace was created, Hackney then got permission or grant funding to buy a CNC machine, which you'll remember was the thing that we used to cut out the panels. And so it got its third life as a CNC factory, making more U-build components. So we've got this kind of self-replicating monster where you can create it and it can create itself, and it hasn't yet taken over the world, but like I think if you've got AI powering this, then you know everything would just be covered in CNC factories. And that's some of the cladding that you saw on that kind of garden room anyway. So a little bit more like detail as to kind of how all of this works. So when we send out a kit to someone, you can kind of see the things that arrive. You have plywood components, obviously, which are cut, and you can see on the right here the plywood components and how they're cut, so that they have little tabs which fit into each other. We send. I keep knocking this as I go down. So have a wall membrane which goes on the outside, and I'll show you some details in a little bit. We've come up with this sort of option for ground support. So rather than having sort of concrete foundations, we let people use compacted sort of gravel, which is quite low embodied carbon, and then these adjustable feet, a bit like you might get on kind of kitchen sort of cabinets, but each one can take a ton, and then it means that we have lots of them, like a little centipede, and then the building doesn't need any kind of proper foundation. So that's a really kind of low carbon solution we found, and they're made of recycled plastic. So you know we're making a kind of I don't know, compromise there, but you know it's good to have stuff that's very close to the ground, not rot as well. So and obviously the bolts, nuts, washers, you can see a few of them there. Again, the priority with all of these things is that it can be demounted, and you can see them all as well. We show the screws in the visible faces of all our buildings, so nothing gets covered up. There's no glues. You can see here, like this is sort of some of the finessing that we've done around the detailing. So our boxes, we want them to be airtight, or as airtight as possible, so that we don't get leakage and kind of humid air going into the construction system. So this is how you usually have to cut a CNC internal corners. So you can kind of see, you can imagine that the CNC router coming along, and in order to get like a square internal corner, it has to overshoot a little bit, but then it makes all these little holes. So we've come up with a sort of special solution where we do a kind of a V-routed chamfer on the kind of mating component, which that's a kind of very strange sentence, but the result is that it looks like that. I can talk to anyone about that afterwards in the bar if they really care. And the result of this stuff is that it can be built by 3-year-olds. This child was 3. This was a workshop in Bristol, and it can also be built by 70-year-olds, like the people in that extension to Georgian Cottage that I mentioned. So it's a really kind of inclusive way of building. You can see here, like after the kind of building, the boxes have been built together like that, so they all sort of lock together. You then put the screws in. So we have pre-drilled screws, and they're all at kind of regular intervals. The boxes are then bolted, so we use coach bolts, and we either use nuts and washers or wing nuts, depending on whether it needs to be installed with tools or without tools. And again, by putting these at regular intervals, like at 150 centres, then you can move them along, and like one piece will connect with another piece wherever you move it. So just to go into like another sort of detail of like of an actual house that's been made with this is called Nest House. And so what was interesting, this was an opportunity for us to incorporate some of the things that we'd done from Studio Bark, like the Studio Bark project, so working with students, these live builds, and also with a kind of a test U-build home. And so this was a brief for a retired couple, both of whom had sort of disabilities. So one of them had Alzheimer's, and the other one was in a wheelchair. And so they wanted, and they got planning for, with Studio Bark, this kind of single-story house, which was all kind of very accessible and easy to manage. And it was also designed to be a direct electric house, so it would be powered by solar panels, and all of the, rather than AC power like we usually have in the plugs, everything would come directly from that and from the batteries. Again, this was a kind of an idea of the kind of innovation strategy for making the house more efficient. So again, I spoke a little bit about those support feet, that adjustable support feet that we use for our garden pods, but this is the same solution for a whole house. So again, what you see there is called compacted MOT type 1, which is basically a kind of a sub base that they use for roads. But again, this is just crushed aggregate, so it's much lower carbon sort of intensive than concrete. So that just gets compacted. The top layer of soil is scraped back. And then these are called jack pads. So again, they're sort of adjustable feet. We then create a sort of a timber subframe. This is because the boxes, which you can see on the top left, are going to sit onto those. So we're lifting them up above the ground. Here's some of the students who sort of participated in the workshop. They were sort of installing some of the boxes, and you can see the holes that have been drilled for the services to go through. You can see here like how the kind of the overall sort of layout of the building, with the courtyard in the middle. The scaffold has let us down. We were supposed to have a covered scaffold frame, and that didn't arrive. So we've got this kind of centre court type structure where in the middle, where like the big tarps get rolled out when rain stops play. So yeah, that's quite an interesting one. Again, you can see here how the boxes are kind of fitted in, and one of the interesting things is we've created this, it's like a brick bond, so like you get bricks in a wall. We've done the same with the roof so that we can use 2.4 length pieces of plywood to span longer lengths. So that's through Structure Workshop of the structural engineer that we work with. And you can see here, again, the roof's all being bolted together, and that those bolts are going to be visible in the kind of the end build. So again, we're trying to be honest about what we're doing. Here's the students here. So it was really nice to have a diverse group of students from different backgrounds, all working together. And the idea was that they were kind of sponsored to be there, and they also got lots of training from people like Trada. We had the ROBA coming down, giving them sort of some context to what they were doing. They learned to install services. That's actually one of the things that's really quite hard to. We never pre-machine holes for the bigger services, because people always change their mind on site, so you get holes where you don't need them. And this is Deanne Small from ROBA, who's, as I said, who was giving them a lecture on inclusivity. And this is the client who's introducing some of their neighbours to them. But I'll skip over that. So you can see here, this is the membrane I was talking about being installed. And this is kind of what protects the building from the weather before the cladding goes on. This is the cladding and battens being installed, and the green roof on the top of the building. And then that's the kind of final look of it, with the clients sitting out and enjoying it. So it's all kind of Western red cedar, which is cut in a local workshop in Hereford, so around the corner. And you get this kind of really nice sort of dappled light. So you have the solar panels you can just about see at the top, which are sort of shading the windows, but also providing the power for the building. So jumping into some of the details. So I've explained a little bit before. This is another U-build house. You can kind of see the sort of the details that we produce. So here, just looking at the wall build-up when we're creating for a full-on house, we have 18mm plywood on the inside, and that acts as our vapor barrier because the boxes can be airtight, so it's unusual. Usually people put another layer of plasterboard on top, but obviously plasterboard is single-use. So we then fill it with sheep wool or wood fibre insulation, so when you're working on site, you don't get all that itchy kind of glass fibre stuff. We then have the black membrane, or it's shown as blue here, that you saw just being wrapped. And then the sort of vertical battens, counter battens, and then the cladding on the outside. So it's quite a simple structure there, but that is sufficient to get you to 0.15, which is like a passive house levels of wall of U value if you're kind of going for that. You can see the same kind of idea for the roof, but we usually have like a fall in our boxes so that we can use natural insulation on the roof. And then we use a butyl pond liner as our membrane on top, which is then weighted with the sort of green roof substrate. So the idea is that these, all of these materials can be taken off and moved if you ever wanted to. Typically, when someone's building a house, they don't take it down, but they do stuff like extend it upwards, like we've seen already. This is the windows going in. So again, kind of very similar process, but we tape the windows to the boxes, and that's probably the most like non-reversible thing. You know, if you have to take a window out, you have to cut the tape, but it's quite hard to do airtightness without that. We have looked at another system, but I won't get into that now because I've only got probably 20 or so minutes left. So I think this is maybe where the talk takes a little bit of a left turn, because imagine we've set this practice up. We've been interested in doing the right thing. We all kind of knew about climate change, and we studied under kind of tutors who were kind of were very passionate about the environment. So when we set up Studio Bark, we really were trying to push the boundary in terms of how we create environmental architecture through what we were specifying. And yeah, at the same time, I think this was around 2018, there was the kind of that IPCC report saying that we only had like 12 years left before, like to properly change what we're doing as a society before we kind of create these sort of disastrous climate tipping points. And we looked at what we were doing and we were like, look, this is good, but like, are we really doing stuff quickly enough? Like, if we make some nice buildings, like what's going to happen if like the world collapses, but we've got these really nice buildings? And so we saw what was happening in the environmental movement. We saw Greta Thunberg, we saw Extinction Rebellion, we saw people who were kind of suddenly saying, you can't just be sustainable anymore, like this is an emergency. So we had to think about like what we could do as architects to try and support that. And this is like the kind of key moment, I think, which changed a lot of things, certainly in my mind. This was April 2019 in Oxford Circus, where XR, Extinction Rebellion, had brought this pink boat into the middle of the street. And they kind of captivated me really with this. Just the kind of their branding, their kind of brazen sort of silliness. They talk about love and rage about the climate crisis, saying like this is all really, really bad, but also like let's challenge it in a really fun and creative way. And I really liked that. So it was very inspiring. And so a number of us kind of were at the studio were wondering how we could help this organization that seemed to be creating change by making these kind of bold and colourful roadblocks, because that was the idea, like block the road, cause a bit of disturbance to people, create media attention. So what we came up with, as you quite could obviously imagine, what could we possibly have offered them, was flat pack roadblock boxes. So we took the existing system that we had, we spoke to some of the action designers from XR, and then this was very important because obviously, as you know, we're professional practice, we wanted to not implicate ourselves in something that could be, you know, seen as illegal. We open sourced our design, gave it to Extinction Rebellion for them to do what they wanted to. And nonetheless, we also thought it would be interesting to run a workshop with some students for some hypothetical structures that people could build to elevate themselves above a crowd. And that's because we learned that there's a very interesting sort of point above 2 meters in height. A police officer is not able to pull someone down from a protest structure without specialist lifting equipment. And so we thought it would be very interesting to design hypothetical structures for protesters to be able to place themselves safely above this level. So the students were given the brief to take these flat pack boxes and work out the most comfortable structure that could be safely built with the minimum number of boxes. And they did this really rigorously, and they actually ended up getting a kind of a REBA prize for the project. You know, they did structural bending analysis, they did health and safety risk assessments, looking at how you could create these hypothetical structures. Obviously, hypothetical in that, you know, the students were not involved in any protests. They were only talking about this kind of in an academic context. So that they, you know, they produced these kind of sketch ideas for how these could be brought together. But simultaneously, obviously, the Extinction Rebellion, who we had open sourced the design to, had decided that they wanted to use these boxes. And so they actually did a big sort of crowdfunder and raised enough money to create 600 of them, which were sort of cut and assembled by groups, community groups, who kind of donated time, because there was quite a lot of goodwill towards XR at the moment, at that time, including instruction manuals for how you might assemble them. And then a number of them found their way into Trafalgar Square for the October Rebellion in 2019. Groups were assembling structures that they actually sort of ended up looking very similar to the hypothetical designs that the students came up with. But I mean, you know, obviously no one knows exactly how that happened. But some of the other things that were built were stages. So we had this. That's George Monbiot speaking from the kind of Guardian and various other outlets, speaking on top of a stage. And the reason that these stage was building was the stage was having to be built out of these flat pack boxes was because the XR warehouse had been raided, and all of their infrastructure had been stolen. So this was actually a kind of a plan C or a plan D that became plan A. So you can see some of the other things that were built. So there was a lot of sort of media coverage about the time, and someone sort of coined the phrase, "This is protest architecture." The architecture that is being used to facilitate protest. We've got 5 minutes. I said this takes 10 minutes, but it's okay. We started late, didn't we? I'll speed up slightly. So you can see here, this is a really interesting design feature. The person there looking very happy with himself has got his arm in a lock-on tube, so which is a metal tube which can connect two protesters together. And if you do that into the structure of a building, then the person can't be taken out because they've got their hand connected into the structure. So you've made this kind of really interesting puzzle to be taken apart by a kind of a state official. So part of the kind of design brief of protest architecture is to create a structure which people can occupy space with, which can nonetheless not be removed easily. And obviously, this is non-violent, so there's, everyone is sitting there peacefully, and it's a continuation of some of the kind of trends like, the suffragettes chaining themselves to railings, for example. It's a modern day equivalent of that. And so it happened that on the 10th of October in 2019, I found myself standing on top of a tower in Trafalgar Square, and unfortunately was subsequently arrested, which is something where, at the time I was guilty only of obstructing the highway, which is a sort of a minor traffic infringement. Obviously won't go into it now, but some of the laws have now changed. If I'd done that again, I'd probably be in jail. So I'm certainly not advocating that people do this, but it was an interesting and perhaps silly thing to have done. Nonetheless, what it did lead to was a book with the ROBA, hooray! There was me thinking that it might impact my architectural career negatively. What it did give me was a platform to talk about activism and how we need to push things forward. And this is maybe, the kind of sort of stuff we're talking about aside. I think the important thing is that we all, I think, recognise that we need to be doing things faster. And the book was also in 4 colours, which was quite nice. And then following that, I got the kind of bug for writing, and decided that this topic that we mentioned, protest architecture, I was really interested in that. Like, how can architecture be used to support movements around the world that are trying to make things better? So I went to interview everyone who was doing something in design that was sort of relevant to that. So in the kind of few minutes I've got left, I'm just going to give a quick preview to some of that before we open up to questions. So here's some of the sections from the book, which are beautifully illustrated by Connie Beauchamp. So we had occupation as the kind of like one of the themes or sort of titles, and we look at how over the years sort of people have subverted the power in civic buildings in order to express their discontent, whether that's the storming of the Bastille or whether it here is the farmers' protest in Delhi. So by coming to these big structures which are intended to kind of convey their kind of regal sort of majesty over people and climbing up them, then that's a kind of a bit of a thorn in the side. We also look at another thing, alteration, so the permanent adaptation of the built environment as it's found. This is the Colston statue in Bristol, which obviously some of you will be familiar with the Black Lives Matter protest, which happened in 2020. And this happened at a time where there was kind of a lot of upset about this sculpture, this statue, which was linked to a slave trader. But this slave trader had also been very instrumental in helping finance and shaping the city of Bristol. So it was, kind of very difficult thing, for people to challenge the architecture that they're all familiar with and use. And here was someone who facilitated that, but also was guilty of some things. But they decided to alter the structure by throwing him into the river. You also have a look at reappropriations, so taking an existing form and adding like a kind of a new layer to it. So it's kind of some drapes. This was on Rishi Sunak's house. This is Greenpeace, who did a kind of an overlay of his house. And again, like what I'm showing with all of these things is not that I think this is necessarily a good or a bad idea. This is showing how architecture is a symbol to many people, and to create an image that overlays a piece of sort of famous architecture or landmark is a very powerful thing. So I think we shouldn't underestimate like the kind of the visual importance of our imagery. Barricades. This is obviously the very evocative and kind of the thing people would often think about when you think about revolution, France, barricades, Victor Hugo, Les Miserables. But people have updated the kind of classic barricade with these rather wonderful inflatable structures, which, unlike the cobblestones of old, which might injure a police officer when thrown, these ones are rather more fun, and they just the riot police appear slightly overdressed for the beach party. So I think that the point is that a bit of humour and a bit of design can actually help to kind of de-escalate what could otherwise be, you know, sort of quite a scary thing. Beacons are these very wonderful things. They're bamboo tensegrity structures, so they're using architectural principles popularized by Kenneth Snelson and Buckminster Fuller in the 60s. But these designs never found a use in their time because they were too wobbly. They're basically compression members connected by wires, such that when they're put together, they look like they're floating. And these were used, again, as kind of very creative roadblocks. So they found their purpose in protest architecture. And then finally, exhibitions. So, you know, we looked at how people are trying to push the boundaries in terms of showing interesting items on display. So not everything that is protest necessarily is against the law. You know, people can push through the work that they create, through the art installations that they use. And we were really lucky to get to work with the V&A on a installation called Barricade and Beacon, which taking two of the themes from the book, and their brief to us was to try and build a barricade between the permanent architecture installation, which is just down the road, obviously from here, as I don't need to tell you. But the funny thing was that the barricade needed to be wheelchair accessible, so it had to have a sort of 1500 by 2.1 high sort of hole in it. So I think that's really nice. That's the kind of barricade I want to see. And then these twin balancing beacons that you see here, which were first built in Switzerland, and they were very difficult to install because there was only 200 mil clearance from the roof. And the curator was almost very, very upset, but not. So this is still on roughly on time.